Dear colleagues and participants of the conference, welcome to our virtual presentation. My name is BEKE Judit. I'm an associate professor at Budapest Business School, and my colleague, co-author of our research paper, Dr. SCHLETT András, is a professor at Pázmány Péter Catholic University in Hungary. Dr. SCHLETT and myself are happy to be here and talk about the 150 years of the Hungarian milling industry. Let's look at the structure of our study. As you can see here in this slide, this presentation and our paper as well is chronological. First, we give a short overview of the 19th century boom or rise of the Hungarian milling industry, and then a separate chapter looks at the period between the two world wars and the changes in the period of socialism. And finally, we look at the specifics of the period following the 1989 regime change. We will focus on the successes and failures of the Hungarian milling industry and the responses to the different types of challenges that can provide many lessons for the present as well. The Hungarian milling industry gained world fame as early as the 19th century. Several technical innovations contributed to this success. At the end of the century, Budapest was the largest milling center in Europe and the second largest in the world after Minneapolis in the US. One of the many innovations of the time was the roller mill that you can see here in the picture. A well-known invention was the world-famous so-called Megwart roller mill, a Hungarian construction. The modern roller mill can be seen in this picture, in this slide. And especially because of these new innovations, the capacity and the production levels increased significantly. Moreover, Hungary saw substantial external and domestic market opportunities. The country was able to organize mass production in a way that encouraged a whole series of technical inventions, as a result of which the grinding capacity of the Hungarian milling industry far exceeded the level of domestic grain production. At the turn of the century, Hungarian flour was exported to 20 different countries. From the 1830s onward, the food industries related to agricultural production, and especially the milling industry, showed rapid development. This prosperity was fueled by a significant increase in flour exports. According to statistical data, while the annual export volume of flour was around 18,000 tons between 1840 and 1850, 400,000 tons of flour had already been exported by 1869. The chart in the picture shows the changes in the number of mills in Hungary between 1863 and 1906. In the 1870s, the number of water mills and animal power mills was the most significant, as you can see. Thanks to a stable market, the sector was able to raise significant capital as early as the 1850s, providing financial backing for technological developments. The previously small capacity hydropower mills began to be replaced by steam mills, whose numbers and output increased. This was the so-called milling turnover, which played a major role in increasing the volume of exports to Germany to 125,500 tons. Serious disparities between raw material supply and processing capacity on the one hand, and production volumes and uptake markets on the other hand. In the map, you can see that Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory at that time. Previously, the Budapest milling industry had obtained 50–60% of its raw material from the lost areas. The mills in Budapest lost the Serbian and Romanian sources of wheat. And it soon became apparent that without markets, the milling, sugar, beer and leather industries were unable to take advantage of their capacities, which had been scaled to supply the monarchy. During the World War, the American milling industry completely conquered Western European markets, and in the years following World War I, only Austria and Czechoslovakia remained viable consumer markets outside the country. But the Hungarian milling industry had to face competition from the French and German milling industries as well. So between the two world wars, most states sought self-sufficiency and tried to build and increase their milling capacity, as a result of which the previously significant consumer markets of Hungary continued to shrink. The period was characterized by the customs policy pursued by Austria and Czechoslovakia, which remained the only consumer market from the territory of the old monarchy. As a result, exports to these countries also fell sharply. The states, previously in need of significant imports, responded to the changed conditions with the rapid and state-subsidized development of their milling industries. Both countries provided greater discounts on grain imports compared to flour imports. The agricultural duties of Austria in 1925 and Czechoslovakia in 1926 greatly reduced Hungarian flour exports and increased grain exports. Therefore, the Hungarian mills could utilize only 20 or 25% of their capacity. Moreover, they lagged behind the competition with their prices. All this plunged the milling industry into a serious crisis. While flour exports amounted to almost 257 million Hungarian coronas in 1913, they only amounted to 69 million coronas in 1926. The milling industry became dominant by the end of 1949, when mills with a capacity of more than 10 tons per day or more than 10 employees were taken over by the state. 660 mills in Hungary were nationalized at that time, whose daily grinding capacity was about 12,000 tons, and not much later, in 1951 or 1952, about 700 small-scale mills were nationalized at a hurried pace, very rapidly. From then on, bread grain could only be grounded in state-run mills. To organize and manage the milling industry, the Milling Industry Directorate was established in 1948, which supervised the activities of the sector until 1962. By 1967, all mills in Hungary were electrified. While in 1938, 75 kilowatt per hour of electricity was needed to grind 1 ton of grain, by 1975, as little as 42 was enough. Although the milling industry had gradually shrunk within the food industry, it still played an important role in foreign exchange acquisition. As you can see in the table, marked in red, milling industry ranked high in the foreign currency revenue and foreign exchange output during this period. Following the wave of privatization between 1993 and 1995, several mergers began, and this process lasted until 2003. A significant number of mills with small capacity were closed by their owners, and many mills were closed by the new owners after their acquisition. There was less and less room left for smaller players who haven't been able to raise enough capital to modernize their company and technology and build new external and internal relationships. And this process didn't stop in the 2000s. And the tough competition became even stronger. In the 2010s alone, about 10-12 major businesses closed down or merged into other companies. As a result of this process, several large companies such as Serbona, Cornexi have disappeared from the domestic market. As a result of this process that started after 2004, automated large mills became dominant in Hungary. In some cases, the former units were replaced by greenfield development, and almost all large mills are automated today. It should be noted that while a large mill could previously give employment to about 80-100 people, after the changes, 30 or 50 people are enough to operate a mill with a similar capacity. And it's interesting to note that in 2011, 40% of flour production came from foreign-owned mills. In 2017, 5 large companies accounted for 73% of the total production in Hungary. And to sum up, the Hungarian milling industry became world-class, as we could see, producing significant quantities for export from the last third of the 19th century. In the 20th century, however, the most serious problem was the continuous narrowing of the foreign and domestic flour markets. Flour exports decreased, and as a result of the industry developments in the neighboring countries, an increasing amount of cheap imported flour was brought in the country. The reasons for the failure of the milling industry in Hungary are several, but it can be stated that the lack of efficient technology and organized logistics was the biggest problem in the sector. Another problem was the varied, uneven quality of the finished products and also the quality of the raw material. It would be a step forward if the product range were to move towards higher value-added flours and ready-to-eat flour types. It may also be an advantage to use more intensive marketing to promote domestic products, but the result of this process would only fall very slowly. However, a significant increase in flour exports cannot be expected. It is a fact that the future for the Hungarian milling industry is the improvement of technical standards. Producing special flour products could be a breakout point, because consumer demand is shifting towards whole grain products or other special or even traditional local products. And at this point, let us bring this presentation to an end. In the full paper, you can find more information about this topic, and we are happy to answer your questions or have further discussions about this topic. Thank you very much for the attention.